What a pleasure it is to be in beautiful, blustery, wintry Tidewater, but I really appreciate the warm welcome, and I appreciate the Zionist spirit that we're going to overcome whatever weather challenges we have. And unfortunately, as Zionists today, we have challenges. There's no other national movement in the world today that has been singled out and systematically disrespected, delegitimized, as Zionism has been. And this has been going on for decades, and it's part of a systematic campaign fueled by Arab oil money, originally engineered by Soviet propagandists to question Israel's very right to exist. One of the lowest moments goes back to November 1975, when the United Nations General Assembly itself singled out one form of nationalism. In the form of nationalisms, there were 142 nations at the time. Now there are 193 nations in the time in the UN. They've singled out one form of nationalism, Zionism, which is Jewish nationalism, and said it was illegitimate. Well, fortunately at that time, there was one American statesman, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a tough kid from the poor streets of New York, who'd made his way on to be a Harvard professor, who had worked in the Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford administrations, who was now representing the United States in the UN. And he, along with the Israeli ambassador, Chaim Herzog, fought this resolution because they understood that words matter. And they understood that this, what Moynihan called this big red lie, this big Soviet-inspired lie, could come back to haunt the Jewish people. Because they were taking the ugliest word in the international vocabulary, racist, and applying it to the Jewish state. Well, 3 weeks before the resolution made it to the General Assembly, it first had to go through the UN Human Rights Council, the third committee. And on that day, Moynihan didn't speak. But Herzog spoke. And he said, the Jewish people are not on trial here. The UN is on trial. Will the UN stand by its ideals? Will the UN stand for human rights and against racism? And then he sat down. Of course, the inevitable happened. The delegates passed the resolution on to the General Assembly, and they broke out in mock applause, mocking Israel, mocking the Jewish people. Herzog had given his delegates strict instructions not to show any emotion. And they sat there with their hands clasped, representing the dignity of Israel, the dignity of the Jewish people. But from across the room, this 6'5" Irish Catholic kid from New York stands up tall, straightens his tie, walks across the room, hugs Herzog, and really loudly yells, "Welcome!" The New York Times reported it as the American ambassador embraced the Israeli ambassador. Daniel Patrick Moynihan would subsequently say, "I uttered an Anglo-Saxonism not found in the Talmud." And what he was basically saying was, we reject you. We repudiate this. Now here's the challenge for Zionism today. We have many attacks. And I think we're all suffering from communal PTSD. We're all traumatized by living in the age of delegitimization. Wherever you stand politically, from the left to the right, the fact that Israel has been singled out, the fact that only Israel is on probation, affects your understanding of Israel. It makes us get too insane over who's pro-Israel and who's anti-Israel, as if it's a binary choice. When we know that in the United States there are Democrats and Republicans. Democrats are pro-American and Republicans are pro-American. Why do we immediately go and accuse someone of being anti-Israel if they criticize Israel? And we also see all too often this big red lie which tried to make Israel guilty of crimes it has no connection to. Colonialism, imperialism, which was part of the big empires. Racism, when you can actually convert in to the Jewish religion and then be a part of the Jewish nation. So Zionism is actually quite permeable. There's no racism there. And yet we're all defensive, and sometimes we see our critics using those attacks. We also see what I call delegitimization light. This, okay, I know Israel's not so bad, but if there's so much anger at Israel, it must be guilty of something. Being an academic, I use a very technical term. I call this the Israel Ichsa effect. That somehow people are just kind of recoiling from Israel. And it's the ideological equivalent of secondhand smoke. All the toxicity in the air is affecting people in the Jewish community and beyond. There's also a serious issue here. In a world where a Jew can marry the high princess of America, Chelsea Clinton, and have, let's call it, a Jewish ceremony with Jewish touches, a chuppah, a kippah, a talit on a Shabbat. What do we need a Jewish state for? We're so welcomed in America, and it's a great thing, and I don't want to diminish it. We're so much a part of the American experience. Why do we need all this trouble? Why do we need all this challenge? Why not just fit in? And even if we say, okay, I'm going to keep my Jewishness, why not just keep it as an American Jewishness? Why have a tie to a place so far away? So when I think about this, I'm kind of depressed. What do we do? Beyond that, we have to think about the challenge to America itself. In the United States today, the sociologist Robert Bellah points out, there's something called radical individualism. We live in the world of the me, my, more, now, iPad, iPod. The individuation that comes from technology, the breaking down of family structures, the breaking down of community structures makes, as Robert Bellah points out, this process of growing up largely a negative process of breaking free from your family, from your community, from your inherited ideas. Think about it. What's the college experience for most of our young students? Leaving the family, leaving tradition, leaving community, and being free. And that's, by the way, why birthright is such an effective intervention, because it's for students from the age of 18 to 26 who have left the family, who are looking for roots. And what's the bar bat mitzvah? The bar bat mitzvah comes from the idea that in order to grow up, you have to embrace your community. You have to be a part of your tradition. You have to understand your roots. You don't run away. And Robert Bellah said, we're this nation of disconnected searchers. We're divorced from our traditional sources of authority. He interviewed a woman named Sheila, and he said, what do you believe in? She said, I believe in Sheila. She believes in Sheilaism. And we're creating a nation of 350 million super individualists. And there's a lot of good in that. But how do we connect? How do we bond? And Robert Bellah asked, is it possible that we can become citizens again and together seek the common good, have some sense of citizenship? So with all this, the challenges facing the Jewish world, the challenges facing the United States of America, the challenges facing the modernity, we also have the Palestinian conflict. And until, of course, that's solved, it will also be a challenge. And the search for peace is one that keeps us all going. And we see, as a result, this perception game. What's the Israel that you see? All too often we see Israel only as a fight between religious or non-religious, soldiers only in an aggressive mode. We could also see an Israel of dance and of song. We could see an Israel where young soldiers teach Arabs as they do in this picture. And I'm also starting to see something else in my travels around the US. I'm starting to see this assumption that Israel is the imperfect democracy and America is the perfect democracy. And if only Israel were more like America, then all would be good. And so we talk about Israel having immigration problems, but we don't acknowledge that the United States has its own immigration challenges. We talk about Israel having church-state challenges. We don't talk about the complexity of finding the right balance between church and state in the United States of America. When we talk about Israel as being a dysfunctional democracy, when it's not Israel that was shut down in the fall, and it's not Israel that's currently so gridlocked. So rather than getting into this game of one better than the other, I think we have to have a different model. We have to look for a different approach. So I want to suggest that we have a jujitsu, that we take all this negative and turn it to something positive, that we think about America and Israel in a new way. And I think if we could resurrect and reframe and redefine and renew what Zionism is all about, we could make major progress. I recently was at a remarkable consultation where we had Israelis and Americans, older expert types and younger students types talking together about what Israel and Zionism means to them. And one of the things that emerged from that conversation was my realization that in many ways, it's odd, and it's part of this traumatic effect that I said of delegitimization that we're running away from the term Zionism. On college campuses today, you often find that people say, well, we'll have an Israel on campus coalition, but we won't use the Z word. We won't use Zionism because that's too problematic. Why? Because it was systematically singled out in the UN in the 1970s. It's been systematically singled out since. So we've internalized the negativity of our enemy. But think about it. Israel is a country. All countries are imperfect. Israel has its strengths and its weaknesses. Israel should be the vehicle for some of people's anger. Israel should be the place where people say, okay, I'm fed up. Zionism is the movement first to establish a Jewish state and now to perfect it. Zionism should be the broader, more expansive, more aspirational notion. And the fact that people are afraid of the Z word shows just how much the term has been beaten up. And so, with great respect to President Kennedy, who said, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. I actually want to ask, what can our country do for us? What can having an Israel do for us here in Norfolk or Virginia Beach? What can having an Israel mean for us building our lives, building our families, building our communities? And I call that utilitarian Zionism. We're going to use Israel. I don't want it just to be about Israel, the guilt trip. What have you done for Israel lately? I want it to be about Israel as the Jewish journey and as the human journey. What does this remarkable experiment mean to me? And so I also think we have to go from what I call Popeye Zionism, and I use an old-fashioned cartoon on purpose, where he said, I am what I am, take me as I am. And Zionism is more aspirational, so let's call it incredible Zionism. And it goes back to that powerful interaction between Dash and his mother Helen, where Helen's telling him to fit in, be like everybody else. And Dash says, no. When Helen says, everyone's special, Dash says, which is another way of saying no one is. I want Israel to be special. I want the Jewish experience to be special. And I want Zionism to be the vehicle for bringing in that sense of special. And so I'm saying basically going from a Leninist Zionism, where we're marching in tone and we always have to sing from the same hymnal, let's go to a Leninist Zionism, where we sing with John Lennon, Imagine All the People. And we have a Zionism of imagination and ideology. And so I want to go from Israel advocacy, the constant defending of Israel, to identity Zionism. I want to go from a sense of what's the problem of Israel, and Israel of what I call the hunched back and the furrowed brow, to an identity Zionism. We can say, how can we sing a new song of Zion? How can we breathe more broadly? How can we delight in this country? And let's think of a few building blocks for that. First of all, Zionism is about the Jewish past. And all the great thinkers, all the great modern philosophers teach us that without memory, we have no identity. We've all seen it. You've seen the television show, somebody's hit in the head, and they lose their memory. They wake up, and what's the first thing they say? Who am I? You lose your memory, you lose your identity. And Zionism is about restoring Jewish memory and feeling it in the land, feeling it in the space, feeling it in our historic homeland. And it's about community. It's about understanding that the latest studies of happiness and of millennials and of searching for meaning show that people want to connect. They want to be a part of something greater than themselves. They don't just want to be about me, my. They want an us. And in a large country like the United States of America, you need small groups of us because human beings want to bond. And the New York Times columnist David Brooks, in his work on what he calls the human animal, trying to understand the neurology of community and the neurology of ideology, creates what I call, this is my phrase, oxytocin Zionism. Oxytocin is one of the things that makes you feel good in your brain. And he points out that there are neurological studies that show that when we see people who are similar to us, see people who agree with us, see people who are like-minded, we get this flood of positive emotion. And so that bonding, that tribalism can be very positive. And what Zionism does is it takes that tribalism and it makes it transcendent. It says it's not just about holding on to something, but about believing in something bigger than yourself. So to find some building blocks for this new Zionist vision. Let's look at some framing ideas. So the first is we have to go to the sense of why do we need a Jewish state and what is Judaism? And we have to go back to the notion that Judaism is what one of my teachers called an Oreo cookie. Just as an Oreo cookie has the cookie part and the cream part, so too the Jews are both a people and a nation, people and a religion. Without the people part and the faith part, we don't have the Oreo cookie. And you can't understand Judaism, you can't understand the holiday of Passover without understanding that it's both a moment of national liberation and also a moment of spiritual redemption. And again we see that the two strands of the Jewish DNA together. In fact, there's a strange thing in the United States of America today. Most American Jews call themselves religiously Jewish, and yet they're not religious. Most of their Jewish identity is about culture, family, community, history, food even. It's ethnic. And our Christian brothers and sisters, who have much more of a religion, don't quite understand it. And because we are living in this world of the Judeo-Christian embrace, which is fantastic, we sometimes decide that Judaism is like Christianity and it's just a religion. And no, Judaism is this Oreo cookie, this connection of the nation part, the peoplehood part, and the religion part. And the peoplehood part is our glue. And so I say I'm a Zionist because I'm a Jew. And without understanding that national component, I can't begin to explain a lot of what goes on in the Jewish religion. And in fact, being a good Jew, being a good Zionist, helps me become a better citizen of the world. It helps me understand how to help the world by both having a framework for it and values. I also want to emphasize that Israel, the United States, Canada, England are all democracies, but they're not the same. Israel could learn from the United States about civil liberties and about individualism. The United States could learn from Israel about thickness and tradition and family values. And each one of them is a different model of how to work out many of the democratic dilemmas that democracies struggle with. Israel is also a values nation. It's a nation built on an idea. It's a nation about aspiration. And Zionism is the movement to perfect it and to make sure those ideals are fulfilled. And Israel also is a cultural center for the Jewish people. It brings Judaism alive. Hava Nagilah Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. The soundtracks of our lives, in many ways, would be much emptier without the Israeli voice, without the Israeli cadence, without our Israeli friends. Think of how rich and full our Jewish lives are today because of Israel. And Israel is also Alt Neuland, Old New Land. This fabulous balance between the old and the new, between David Azrieli's sparkling new towers in Tel Aviv and David's citadel in Jerusalem. Are we having fun yet? Have we gotten over the trauma? We get so into Israel, oh, the hunchback and the furrowed brow, Israel as the great headache of the Jewish people. We've got to just enjoy ourselves and start dreaming again. That's what Herzl told us to do. And we need what I call new language. Stop talking about who's pro-Israel and who's anti-Israel. Let's show that most people in the United States of America today, thank God, most Jews throughout the world today, accept Israel's right to exist. And I don't want to recruit new soldiers to the army against Israel. And let's within that have a debate about whether you're more of a settlement hawk or a settlement dove, whether you focus more on security or peace now. Let's change the language and change our approach. To conclude, I want to build a Zionist vision on 4 building blocks with 4 mems. First, tradition, Masoret. The memory, the identity, the sense of community that goes deep and makes us feel like human beings, that we're alive, that we have roots in something greater than the latest fad on television or the latest sale at the mall. The second mem is homeland, Moledet. That we have this place, this space, where we can take our ideas and put them to the test, where we can take our values and bring them alive. We can take our values and sometimes see where they don't maybe fill up. The third mem, Musar, is an ethic. There must be a Zionist ethic, a sense of right and wrong. Zionism is a way of having a higher standard for a nation, because we don't just want to be like everybody else. We want to be normal, but special. We want to be an exceptional people, and Zionism pushes us. And so we have the mem of Masoret, we have the mem of Moledet, tradition, homeland, we have the ethic, and finally, we all know what that fourth mem must be, mishpacha, family. Because without that sense of community, without that sense of love, without that sense of bonding, we don't get that oxytocin rush. We don't get that sense of community. And so we're lucky today. This is not a terrible period in history. We have our challenges. But this is not the 1930s. This is the 21st century. We have so much peace. We have so much prosperity. We have so much freedom. And we also are lucky. We have a thriving Jewish state and a Zionist movement to connect us to that place and to make us grow and stretch and feel better. Thank you, Erev Tov.